Hey, Daniel Serif here today, and we're back for another Guitar Coach Reacts. Since 2007, I've taught over 24,000 guitar lessons, so I thought I'd share a little bit of insight with you. Today, we're doing a little bit of coaching with my great friend, Mitch. So this is a pre-recorded video by Mitch. Let's go ahead and jump into Mitch's guitar playing. So Mitch is playing over in my A minor, all along the Watchtower backing track. That's going to be A minor, G, F, back to G. Let's check him out. Mitch is a lefty. So right away you can tell Mitch is getting around the guitar neck quite well. You know, I know him pretty well, so I know he's using a mix of kind of the boxes and then the diagonal to kind of get up into those higher fretboard areas. Because this chord progression is A minor, G, down to F, and back to G, you can also use the Aeolian mode on it, right? So that's all the notes from C major, that's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, back to A. All right, so you can hear him kind of throwing in some embellishments like that. So kind of the first thing that I would say that would improve Mitch's playing, and this is something that we've been working on and we're going to continue to work on because it's one of the hardest things on the guitar. The guitar is a staccato instrument, right? It is a percussion instrument, essentially. You're hitting the strings with essentially a hammer that's making the strings resonate, right? And so the plectrum, the pick, is kind of like exaggerating the beginning of the note. So that's what we all hear as listeners the most. And then what happens to most people is they end up playing the notes short, like superficially short, like not short in a rhythmic way. When I talk to people about this, a lot of times, they'll say, oh, well, this person plays short or this person plays short. Well, they're playing rhythmically short, like intentionally stopping the note, like say on a 16th note or on an 8th note. So it actually is still in the groove. And one of the things I work on with most intermediate guitar players is how do we connect these notes? How do we make them more connected? And legato is really the term. Okay, so something funny real quick. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this, but Mitch here is actually having an interesting thing going on. He has a swirling effect from the fan above. You see the fan spinning there? So if you're ever wondering what's going on with your guitar tone and you look up and the fan is on, it might be that swirliness of the air kind of changing it. So if you hear that kind of swirl on Mitch's sound, that's where it's coming from. Okay, cool. All right, so number one, I would really be thinking, Mitch, about how do we play all of our notes as long as possible. Now, I don't mean that you have to play, you know, whole notes and half notes and quarter notes, like longer notes. I mean you just have to hold whatever note you're playing for as long as possible before going to the next note. So just, you know, that would be a big principle, is start really working more and more every time you play on making those notes as long as possible. All right, the second thing is I think that the fan is causing also a little bit of tuning issues because it's pitching. It's really actually shaking the notes. But what I would say is that just make sure you're 100% in tune so that when you go to do a vibrato and all those kind of things, another kind of classic intermediate thing that I hear from guitar players is they have kind of a bit of an anxious vibrato. Now, how do you improve that? How do you make that better? Well, there are a couple quick things. Number one thing is when you're going to vibrato, make sure that you start at a neutral place, meaning not bent at all, and make sure that note is perfectly in tune. Okay? Then what you want to do is you want to decide, all right, does it make more sense for me to pull down or push up? I took a great lesson a long time ago from my friend Ben Forehand, and he seems to think that the 3 thickest strings pull down, the 3 thinnest strings push up. Either way's fine, no big deal. Okay, so then when you start to do the vibrato, you're starting from that neutral place, and then basically you want to make sure that you pull and then release every time. What often happens to people is that they don't get like a full release and they're basically bending out of tune and then vibratoing like this. This happens regularly to guitar students that I've worked with. So make sure that that note starts neutral and then it comes back to neutral every time. Whether you're pulling down or pushing up, it doesn't matter. It's the same effect, right? You're basically raising the pitch and releasing it. But make sure you totally release it. And look, you know, Mitch knew that he was going to be on video. We exchanged some videos sometimes, but he knew he was going to be on video for the internet. That's fairly intimidating for most people, right? So there's an element of nerves that are here. So just remember that. But basically, I mean, this is a lot to think about, but this is the kind of stuff that you kind of break down and think about and kind of isolate as you're working in the practice room, right? This is not stuff that you're going to overthink when you're on the gig. I'm a big fan of once you're on the gig, you let go and you just let the practice do the work. All right, let's continue a little bit. Okay, cool. So right there, that's a perfect example of talking about a little bit more about this vibrato thing. Watch. So there's a mix of the fan doing a little bit, but I just want to mention this. So vibrato lives on an XY axis. What I mean by that is there are two ingredients. The depth, which is like how wide you're bending, and then the speed. Okay, and you really just want to be aware, if you have a really fast and shallow vibrato, like, you're going to sound really anxious and you're not going to sound great, right? But I remember hanging out with the great Andy Wood, and he talked about how he was studying the classical singer Pavarotti's vibrato, and he was like realizing that, oh man, this guy has like tons of different variations on his vibrato. And what that does when you learn to vibrato with that kind of level of variety and interest, all of a sudden your vibrato becomes as important as your note choices, right? Because you can shape those notes and it makes you sound so musical and so expressive. All right, cool. So another thing that Mitch and I have been working on, but this is the kind of stuff that just takes quite a while to do, and when you're put on the spot, it doesn't always come out as well. But it's really important to try and play themes in your guitar solos. So what we end up doing, especially when we're nervous and we're on the spot, is we just end up playing a bunch of different ideas that are disconnected. So it might be... So what I always challenge people to do is instead, in the practice room, make sure that you're building upon each idea. I like to do that almost, you know, if I'm trying to tell a story in my solo, I'll start in like lower gears, right, where I have a lot more space. And so a lot of times what I do is I actually force myself to play a line, and then I take my hand off the guitar, right? Okay, so suddenly I have some more space in my solo. Then what I'll try to do is I'll actually try and play an idea off of what I just played, or even repeat the exact same thing. And then a lot of times I might repeat that idea 2, 3, 4 times, and then maybe tack on at the end of the idea something fresh and new that kind of brings me up into the next register. I also, you know, in Mitch's playing here, he's kind of moving around the fretboard a lot rather than telling a story by introducing the characters kind of in his solo. What I mean by that is, imagine you're watching a movie and all of a sudden in the first scene, every single person that's in that movie comes out and spills the beans about what their part is and what they're supposed to do, right? You would leave the theater. You would not be watching that movie anymore. That's boring, right? You know what's going to happen. So I like to think about that in regards to how I build my solo as well. I really love the idea of, okay, how do I kind of like introduce notes? Like I might even start with just 3 notes. I added a 4th. I added a 5th. Now I have this whole little pentatonic scale right here. It's really easy for us to just suddenly have the entire fretboard. It's like you get good at your scales and you know where the notes are, and then you start using all of them all the time. So I would say really that level of restraint is just so important. So a couple things here. There's a little bit of anxiety, of course, from recording this, but what I always try to say to people is make sure you're breathing, make sure you're relaxing. So I've heard Mitch quite a bit nowadays because I've been coaching him for a while, and I know that he can play a little bit more relaxed, but when you're on the spot, it's like hard to. But my recommendation is make sure you're breathing, you're just chilling. If you have like a kind of ritual that you do before you go in and start playing, that's a great idea too. Start to get into there, so you can kind of just think about, all right, am I breathing? Is my neck relaxed? How are my shoulders? You know, I mean, that makes such a difference. Some of the best guitar players in the world look so relaxed. There are others who don't look so relaxed, but in my mind, you know, I try to follow and push towards that more relaxed state because I want guitar to be enjoyable, right? So I would say what Mitch could do here is just think about being a little bit more relaxed, and that might make his notes sound more relaxed and more in the groove, rather than right now what I'm hearing is he's a bit pushed and he's a bit rushy, so to speak. Okay, so again, what I'm hearing with these notes, I would just err on the side of try and make those notes connect much more rather than trying to make them short. I'm sure that this is one of the reasons why I encourage people to record videos as much as possible, because if Mitch listened back to this, he would hear that, but he can't experience that in the moment. We don't have enough mental bandwidth to know how we sound in the moment. I'm certain of that. I've experienced it myself, and I've experienced it in hundreds of students that I've taught. You have so many things going on in your brain that it's hard to know how you sound. That's why recording yourself, videoing yourself like this is so important. Also, having a coach is great. So you can tell he's getting around the scales really, really well. It's just that the ideas seem like he's abandoning a lot of them. He's playing really great stuff. The average listener would not hear it, but as a guitar connoisseur and a guitar solo connoisseur, you know, it's my job, and as a teacher, to kind of help him get better and better in that way. All right, so this is another idea that Mitch and I have started to work on, and that is the idea that basically whenever we go for these faster notes, a lot of times they happen outside of the pentatonic. They might be these kind of like more like 7-note scales, like the A natural minor scale or the Aeolian mode. When people get into these, when they start doing hammer-ons and pull-offs like that, they're great, they're decorating, but what most people do is they entirely lose the sense of the rhythm when they're doing these kind of embellishments or this like kind of legato style. So just in the last coaching session that I had with Mitch, I shared with him about trying to keep these little embellishments of the hammer-ons, pull-offs, and slides. They have to be just as rhythmic as all the other notes, just as if you had plucked them. Super important. Again, being more and more laid back in the groove rather than playing on top. All right, so that was like the most interesting thing that has happened in the last little bit, and that is he switched pickups, right? Now for me, it might have even been a little bit better if he stepped on pedals, but I think he's playing like through his Hot Rod Deluxe. Great amp, but it doesn't really have any pedals, right? We're working on getting him some like pedals he could step on. But that is a really great thing that can happen, is all of a sudden you have this timbre change, right? That's that tone change. And so the listener's ear's like, ooh, it perks up. It's like suddenly it's a lot more interesting. And I think stepping on a lighter overdrive or already having overdrive on would have been like a great move. Again, as you guys get excited as you're playing and jamming, make sure that you're keeping back. The human condition is to rush around in our lives all the time, right? Well, that is expressed in guitar playing, like no doubt about it. So Mitch is kind of like pushing, and what it does is it makes his playing sometimes sound a bit nervous. Again, if he were, playing off of these ideas and trying to build on them more repetition, I think we'd sound a bit more connected, and he'd be keeping our interest a little bit more. But he's playing the guitar great. He's getting around really well. So right there, another example. Bop-be-do-do-do-boom. It goes against the groove rather than... You know, really following the direction of the rhythm and watching out for playing that short stuff. So this is all stuff that Mitch and I are working on, but basically, I think if I could summarize, you know, the soloing, here's what I would tell Mitch if we were live right now. All right, Mitch, I really want you to think about, number one, pacing yourself more, right? So one of the things that's happened in this solo, he's kind of been on the same level of note density and intensity the entire time. So that's like, you know, hard to keep interesting. Now, also, this is a fairly long solo. What I tell people to do is try to just record a 1 to 2 minute solo if you're going to record something. How many gigs are you going to get to go out and play like a 5-minute solo? It's not realistic, right? So don't do that in the practice room. It doesn't make any sense. So really try to think about shifting 6 gears from 1 all the way up into 6 and see if you can really start by playing a line. Maybe that many notes, maybe just... There's level 1 or gear 1, right? And then leave that room to where you can shift into the other ones. Okay, so then you have gear 2 and gear 3 and gear 4 and gear 5 and gear 6. And maybe by gear 6 you're really shredding, right? And then I would say really be aware of your tone in regards to the ceiling fan. That's going to maybe mess up the way that you're vibratoing and such. Then specifically your vibrato touch. Think about, vibrato should not be a default move that you do. Instead, it should be really thought out in a way where it becomes your expression of like, okay, how wide and how fast do I want to play? You know, and really explore those. I would challenge you to do a recording over a backing track where you just vibratoed every note, just learning like, what is that move, right? And then upon, you know, like building in like this gear shifting and such, really try to kind of introduce the notes rather than play all of them right away. Try and add notes as you go. That will really kind of give you more flavor where all of a sudden when you've been down here and you walk up, and that's the first time someone has heard that note, all of a sudden it's way more interesting and special because they haven't even heard you use that note yet, right? So you're building on your playing and you're telling more of a story rather than everybody's being presented at the same time. And then kind of the last piece, because I think Mitch is really sounding good and he's playing the guitar really well. You know, I think the last piece is just building on those ideas and then sitting back in the rhythm. I don't hear really great guitar players just play all over the beat. Instead, they're actually in the groove. They are in the pocket, right? And that's in their solos too. Now, 40, 50, 60 years ago, there are people who were messed up on drugs and some of our favorite music, but you hear about these classic guitar players where they go and they play live and it just be an entire mess, right? Well, I think there's a different aesthetic nowadays in the music where you have to be in tune and you have to be in time, and that is really what makes a great modern guitar player. All right, so those would be the things that I would leave with Mitch. I appreciate you guys watching this. And if you're interested in working with me in my inner circle, go ahead and click that link below and apply to see if you qualify to work in this group. We're having a great time and we're learning so much in this small select program. And don't forget, make sure to watch this video next.